Hey, what's up guys? Node Investor here. Time for a market update here, looking at some of these major charts. I know it's been a while, mostly just been doing live streams lately, but with the market action here, just taking a look at BTC. There's a lot of questions around whether or not it's finding a low or if the price is about to see another big drop down. You're seeing forecasts calling for 6,000, 6,400. So we're going to dive into that today. Take a look at some of the key levels that I'm watching. Take a quick look at some of these other alts. I'm going to cover BTC. We'll cover the big picture here first in depth, and then I'll quickly go through a handful of names. I'm going to be looking at Basic Attention Token, Binance, XRP, ETH, Link, and a few others. So without further ado, let's get to it here. Looking at the price action of Bitcoin here first. There's a couple of things that I want to point out here first. We all know that this price broke out of this big descending triangle pattern here in a drastic drop. I was doing a live stream that day and it was quite a big drop. I mean, we basically went from the upper 9Ks, and within a couple of days, price had already reached that $7,700 level before finding some support. If we zoom in here a little bit, price action is pretty much just kind of trading in this sideways range since then. On the positive, yes, there is some support showing up here around that $7,700 level, but the big picture is still technically leaning bearish. The sellers remain in control. The bulls have not been able to show much follow through yet. We saw a pretty good bounce here from very oversold conditions around that 7,800 level up to around that 8,800 level. It made for a nice quick trade, but that's really all it was an oversold bounce. And now we're getting this pullback, and the question is, will this make a higher daily low or continue lower and break this support that we saw established here around that $7,700 level? And if we take an objective look at the price action, just looking at pure technicals, there's a couple of very simple ways to do it that I like to use. The first is using moving averages here. So let me clear these lines here. And just looking at the moving averages here, I've got two drawn on the chart right now, that 10 EMA, which is a very short-term moving average, and the 22 exponential moving average. That 10-22 is a very popular pair that I like to use, and we can see the price rallied right up to that 22 before pulling back. And the key about moving averages is not so much which moving average you use. Does price hit the moving average exactly? The biggest benefit you're going to get from moving averages is actually the trend directional. And so what I mean by that is, are the moving averages bullish or bearishly inverted? And we can see here they're bearishly inverted. The shorter term moving average is below the longer one here. So by definition, the trend is still very negative. And what's the direction of the moving averages? Clearly, they're moving lower and trending lower. Now, they are starting to flatten out here a little bit with price building a little range, but just from a technical perspective, price is trading below moving averages. The moving averages are heading lower and they're bearishly inverted. So from that perspective, clearly the sellers remain in control. And this multi-month correction that we've seen in place here continues to play out. We've seen this big correction certainly could have broken to the upside here, but this consolidation broke lower. And so for now, the sellers still remain in control, but we are at a key support level here. And if we zoom out and look left here, this support level lines up with the last big support range established back in May and June. And so that's low 7K range is really what I'm watching here. 7,500 is kind of a nice round number. We'll see if that holds up. If price drops below this current support, 7,500 is the level to be watching. Below that, however, there really is not a lot of support. You can see it was a pretty quick move up, and so there's going to be a big gap here, and it's going to be really anyone's guess where we find support below that. The next major level is around that 6K psychological number and then down to the 5Ks. I'm not saying we head down that far if it breaks lower. Most likely it'll fall somewhere in between, but that's kind of the next big levels to be watching there. If we use a fib analysis here, just kind of showing the retracement levels since the lows to the peak here, the 618, which is a key ratio there, the golden ratio, is right at that 7,500 support level. So it'll be real interesting to see if that's where price lands. They tend to undercut or land right above, generally speaking, but that's going to be the next level to be watching. So it lines up pretty well with this broader support level. So until the trend changes, I'm remaining defensive, I'm remaining bearish, other than some oversold bounce trades. You know, certainly some of the alts have been better places to be looking at right now. The relative strength remains with the smaller mid-cap names, although we are seeing a handful of the larger caps moving. For example, XRP recently has been on a nice little tear. We'll look at that chart here in a minute. But just wanted to show you the bigger picture here. On the way down here, let me show some additional moving averages here. So if I add a 50-day moving average to the chart, that's its white line. Again, just kind of supports the notion of the broader trend being bearish, with all three moving averages bearishly correlated and priced below all of them. So on the way up, that's going to be a key one to be watching. That 50-day moving average right around 9K lines up with a round number there. And if we add one more here, the 100-day moving average, that's even further up, still way up here near 9,800. So there's a lot of work to do to turn this picture around. Not saying I'm going to be waiting until all of them are correlated positively before I start going long again, but just keep in mind, just from a pure technical perspective, trend following analysts will clearly say, yes, the trend is negative. It is going range bound here, which is a potential sign that maybe there's a support being built, but certainly has not seen any confirmation of that yet to the upside here. So let me clear these real quick. We'll take a look at a few other charts here. Before I get going, let's look at the total market cap here. If we look at the big picture, just the rally that we saw this year culminated in a peak at around $380 billion in June. And it's come off quite a bit. I mean, here it's down at the low $200 billion range, losing $180 billion worth of market cap, essentially 45% of the total valuation. So the pullback has already been pretty steep. The correction has been pretty deep already. So certainly would not surprise me to see a little bit of a bounce from here, some sort of retracement. But on the way up, that level that it broke down from here a few weeks back, that's going to be the first major resistance level. So around that $240 to $250 billion mark is going to be the first resistance level that needs to be cleared on the way up here. So let's go to one more item I want to show here. The BTC dominance, again, just continues to trickle down here. It peaked in September around that 71% and has continued to just slightly drift lower throughout this correction, meaning some of these alts have absolutely been outperforming Bitcoin on the way up. There's several names we'll look at today, but it's mostly been in small mid-cap land. But here recently, you're seeing a few others, some of the bigger cap names starting to show some outperformance versus BTC here. Also looking at some of the macro trends, the fundamentals, Grayscale put out a newsletter or an article here recently, a little bit of a report talking about their Q3 performance and how much they've raised. And again, this is a glimpse at the institutional demand for Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies. Clearly, Bitcoin still dominates the picture, right? I mean, just the majority of the funds are going into Bitcoin, but in Q3, they raised $254 million, and some of that is starting to trickle into these altcoins, primarily Ethereum Classic. Not so sure about that one, but regardless of the coins that they have in their portfolio, it's interesting to see that there's more of an appetite now for some of the other names other than just Bitcoin at this point. So interesting to watch. We'll see if that continues to form a low on some of these names, such as ETH, BTC. Those pairs have just been in a big downtrend for so long. A lot of them are looking like they're finally turning the corner, and we'll go take a look at those now. So looking at some of the names here, I'll start with ETH real quick. Now looking at the ETH USD chart here, I did have a short trade on this one opened earlier this week. Still have a small position on it. Took most of that, but I'm looking at this bounce here as a potential level to start scaling back into another short position here. And really what I'm watching is, I was just looking at this resistance level here on the way up. If it can't break that 181 level on the way up and start holding above it, then I would look for the resumption of the pullback as the level to start adding back into that short position, with the first target being around that 160s and then down here into the 150s maybe. That'd be a big move, especially with a margined trade, but nonetheless still technically bearish after that big bearish reversal candle we saw on October 11th. That's really just been downtrend, lower lows and lower highs, And so still watching that. If we look at the bigger picture here, that was a break from a little bit of a bearish flag bounce into some resistance here. I think that lined up pretty well with the 618 retracement here. If we look at that, yeah, it did. So from this peak here around that 224 to this drop, the bounce pretty much went right to the 618 retracement level around that 196 level, and it's just kind of been drifting lower since then. So had a bearish bias for it again. That was a little bit more of a quick trade on that pair. If we look at the ETH BTC pair, the bigger picture is looking a little bit more positive, right? After a very long downtrend relative to Bitcoin, price found a pretty good low here in September and has had a nice rally since then, but it's been stalling out here a little bit. Let me clear some of my markups here. Now, the trend is still your friend from this perspective. If we look at the moving averages, again, trending higher, prices holding up above this pair, but we were seeing some divergences on the way up here. You can see the RSI has not been making new highs even as price continues higher. Same thing with the MACD, has been in the red. And again, that just not an automatic sell signal, but it starts to signify that some of the momentum to the upside is waning, and we've seen that here play out with the consolidation. Now the question remains, is this a bullish consolidation? Will it hold up, set up for another breakout, or will it drop out of this range to the downside, losing that 22 EMA, which right now is around that 0.0215 level? Closing below that on a daily basis will start to look like a bearish break, and then at that point, I'd look for a steeper retracement on that pair relative to BTC. So something I'm going to be keeping an eye on here in the coming week or so. Looking at a few other names here, BAT has been on a move lately, outperforming Bitcoin here since the lows here in mid-September. Very nice move, has moved already from the lows up about 71% versus Bitcoin, is coming to a resistance zone here. So if we look left, look at that resistance there. So it's pausing right now. If it can get above that, the next level to be watching on the way up is around that 3,200 level on the BTC pair. But nonetheless, very strong move. The trend is your friend. If we go to the 4-hour chart, just continues to make higher lows, higher highs. There is a little divergence showing up here in this very shorter time frame, right? If we look at that, still pausing here a little bit. MACD is not confirming on the way up, especially coming right into that resistance zone. So something I'd be watching here. If I was in this trade, I'd be just kind of keeping an eye on it, maybe tightening the stops there. If we look at BAT USD, I'm going to cycle through both of these pairs on a lot of these names. You can see a very similar divergence, potentially a double top forming here, right around that 0.23 level. So something to be watching here. On the way up, if it breaks out here, let me go to the daily chart. It's right at, the next level up is going to be about 0.25, and then big resistance level right around 0.28 is what I'd be watching on the BAT USD pair. So those are the levels to be there. Next name on the list, Binance Coin. So looking at BNB here, has had a pretty good little bounce here off the lows. Again, the big picture, this is the daily chart here. Let me take the MACD and RSI off the chart. But again, the big picture, right? Most of these names look this way. Big bearish trends here for the last several months. But here in the recent weeks, finding a low relative to Bitcoin and starting to outperform a little bit. So definitely one to watch here. We've already seen a bullish crossover of the two moving averages, and the momentum continues there in on the daily chart. The trend is your friend here, making higher highs and higher lows. A little bit of a divergence showing up here, like a lot of these names that have had a pretty good run. So just something I'm watching. Not an automatic sell signal, but if you're looking for an entry point, that sort of thing, those divergences could set up a pullback, and that's what I'd be looking for here. So looking at BNB USD Tether, right around that $19 mark, found some resistance, pulling back. Again, could be making a second lower high, and I'd be on the lookout for a potential double top here on this shorter time frame. XRP, I did close out of a good chunk of this position here today. I was watching this, and for those of you that are on the Slack channel, I'm pretty active on there still. I'm not, as active on, on this channel, obviously, or on Twitter in terms of how many charts I post, but on the Slack channel, it's daily, several charts a day that I'm posted, and just kind of regular updates that we're looking at the market. And this was a little setup I posted yesterday. I was looking at the hourly charts for the XRP chart here, and just setting up a classic ascending triangle base. And of course, we saw that big breakout, pullback, another little spike lower, and I'm thinking this is a little bit of a climactic move, potentially a bull trap, and so that was a nice little spike to sell into. Still holding a partial position, but at this point took a good chunk off. Now the broader trend is still very much in place here on the daily chart. The trend is your friend. Higher highs, higher lows, continues to just chug along, and I mean, it has room to go if it still wants to, but it is getting a little long in the tooth here on that daily chart. Has already moved up from the lows, you know, at the peak today around 56%. I mean, again, percentage wise, not massive compared to some of these other names, but considering the large market cap, certainly a very decent move here. So just keep an eye on that daily chart. The 10 EMA is what I tend to watch as kind of that first level on the way down if it starts to break down from here. But for now, still just marching along. XRP USD here, not anywhere near as you know, overbought or anything on that daily chart. Has room to run from there. You can see the RSI is just still here at 63. Next major resistance level on the way up is around that 31.5 cent mark, and then from there you've got some room to run, 34 cents and then 38 cents. But you know, there will be pullbacks along the way with some of these names. Link. Now Link had a very strong move already several weeks back, has been in consolidation mode for a few days now. We can see this pullback. It's interesting to see here on the Link BTC pair that pullback on that daily chart is right now just found some support around that 382 retracement level, and also lines up with some resistance back here that it broke over, kind of pausing, pulling back right now. So certainly one to be watching here on this pullback right at that EMA pair on the daily chart. Let the thing cool off a little bit because the RSI was getting very extended, finally pausing, pulling back, resetting things. Could be setting up for another leg higher. I'd be watching this one here on that 4-hour chart. It's right at some resistance here after bouncing a little bit, so it's going to be interesting to see if it can break higher above that. Looking at the USD pair, right at resistance again here. If we look at the horizontal lines here, right around $2.50. That was really the breakdown point. Found a pretty good support level there, formed a big bullish hammer reversal candle with some high volume right at the low, and made for a good bounce. Now it's right at that level. 250 is the key. If it starts to hold above that, that would be positive for the broader picture on Link. A few more quickly before we wrap this one up. RCN, not on that exchange. Here we go. Big picture is what I'm watching here on this guy, the daily chart, after a very strong move. And just to put it into perspective, 350% in 11 days. Very strong move there. Has been in consolidation mode since then, forming a symmetrical pattern here. Now it has had some wicks on the up and the downside, so you know, some of these lines are subjective, but the bigger picture, the consolidation continues. Price continues to coil up, so definitely one I'm watching here for potential breakout. Volume has also been drying up here as this consolidation continues, and generally low volume precedes the big volatility, the big move out of range. The question is, will this break higher or lower? It's a symmetrical setup. It has a neutral bias, but considering the prior strong move and some other factors behind this name, there's a good chance that this one could break to the upside. So definitely one I'm watching right now here. And TNT is another one in that category. Has been on a tear, but is finally starting to show some signs of momentum slowing down here. Again, if we look at the percentage move from the 19th of September to now, about 219%. Not bad. But if we zoom in here a little bit, some of that is starting to show some loss of momentum. You're seeing some signs of distribution here at the highs with the volume starting to spike here. So definitely one I'm watching for a potential pullback. But, you know, it's been a strong name. The trend is your friend. But I'm not so sure I'd be chasing him right here exactly. And one more, looking at 0x. Now 0x has made several moves along the way. The last real clean setup here, and again, this is one we posted on the Slack channel here, but the last real clean setup was this cup and handle setup that it gave us about, what, 2 weeks ago or so. After a strong run, finally consolidated, pausing. The 10 EMA on the daily was right below that, supporting it. So it made for a good confluence of levels of support made for a very tight entry point in case it failed. And of course it broke out, hit the first target. The first target was a measured move target. So if we do a measured move from the cup and handle, extrapolate that out from the breakout point, that first target was right around that 3,200 level. Hit that, started to consolidate in and around that level right there before setting up for another move higher. And the next move was kind of a couple of levels I was watching here. I'm going to go to the daily chart. And that was this little range right here, right? So prior support, prior resistance back in here. And so this range is what I was looking for. And that's really where it went to before pausing again here. The last several days have been pretty volatile, choppy at these levels. So we'll see if this one just sets up another consolidation point. It already has had a very strong run, mind you. This one again up about 160% since that low off the bottom here versus Bitcoin. So there's certainly some names moving out there. Even though Bitcoin has been in a pullback and a consolidation, there are still a handful of alts that have bucked the trend, if you will. Matic is another one. There's a handful more. I won't go through all the charts right now, but just wanted to point that picture. But after those big moves, they tend to digest some of that. So just something to make note of, especially right now in this market with Bitcoin kind of at a critical point. It could break down from here. It could break out. So just something I'm watching. I'm certainly playing it more defensive now. The oversold bounce, when Bitcoin hit these oversold conditions and then finally started to find a low, a lot of those alts had a nice little run from that point. But now with Bitcoin on the pullback again, certainly getting a lot more defensive and just going to wait this one out, be patient, and I'm not going to overtrade this at this point until I see one way or the other which way the next move is going to play out. So that's going to be it for today, guys. Thanks for watching. I will likely be doing another live stream early my day tomorrow, so look out for that as we head into the weekend. And until next time, take care, everyone.